I should disclose that I am definitely a MicroStrategy investor. And there's not a 4-year period where you're not going to be able to have a positive return on Bitcoin. So that note was $3 billion. You know what the interest rate was on that, the coupon?
0%.
Zero. Bitcoin's volatile. You and I know that. We've laid in bed some nights staring up at the ceiling as it drops down 40%. You know, sometimes 75%. We've gone through these times. And, you know, we're hard as nails right now. You and I, we're a couple of badasses. Now you've got all these QIBs, you've got all these institutional investors, family offices. They're all daily now looking at Bitcoin's price. They're following it in the news. They have an actual interest in it. Bitcoin is the royal flush. Okay, so once you understand that, you just take your chips, you just come up to the table and you push them into the table. You're all in. And I am.
G'day, George. It sure sounds like Michael Saylor through MicroStrategy has unlocked the infinite money glitch. MicroStrategy now holds more than 2% of the Bitcoin supply, and he's not stopping. MicroStrategy is set to go on the NASDAQ 100 by Friday. I've brought you back onto the show. I want to dive into MSTR. I don't really understand it. I know you do. So what's going on? He's doing like a $1 billion arbitrage. The guy's unstoppable. How is Saylor just continually stacking these sats, man?
Basically, Saylor has sailed the ships onto the shore. They've offloaded and he's standing there and he's told everyone, including the investors like myself and the crew on the ship, just turn around and burn the ships because it's like a one-way. He is committed to Bitcoin. You know, going forward, that is one thing. He cannot sell any Bitcoin. He can't sell a Satoshi. He has committed himself on this journey. And obviously, it's paid off tremendously. And we'll talk about that. I am still kind of dumbstruck by this, not money glitch, but this ability of his to continue to use the existing markets to just get more and more Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It's financial engineering that we've really never seen before in human history. We've never really had an asset, the world's hardest, scarcest monetary asset, just to be able to unlock it. It keeps going up and he keeps diving in. What I'm really interested in, and it's a conversation that happens on X all the time, is talking about the multiple or the MNAV. So I don't really understand it. I thought it'd be really helpful if we can break down in a basic way what the Bitcoin MicroStrategy play is here, how he is doing all this financial engineering. Just in full disclosure for everyone watching, I don't hold any MicroStrategy. It's Bitcoin in cold storage. For me, that's where my focus is. However, I think what Michael Saylor is doing is incredibly interesting. Maybe you'll change my mind, maybe you won't, but always keeping like my mind open to the information and what's going on in the world, because the world's changing in a pretty dramatic way. But before we even dive into that, firstly, how are you? Welcome back, mate.
I'm doing great, bud. I should disclose that I am definitely a MicroStrategy investor. In fact, the Wall Street Journal interviewed me about, 2 weeks ago, and part of that, an article covering investors in MicroStrategy. And I fit a unique group in the sense that I'm, retired at this time, except working, as you can see, if you look on the screen. I mean, I'm working in the studio full time as an artist, but nonetheless, I made a significant investment in MicroStrategy in January of this year and ended up, it just ballooned. I mean, it has taken over. It's like that little bird that's been left off in a nest, doesn't belong there, and he just keeps growing bigger and pushes all the other birds out of the nest. MicroStrategy has taken over a large portion of my portfolio. And, it is a difficult, it's really tough to understand. I will confess that I actually bought MicroStrategy years ago when it was back in 21. And it boomed then at the time when we were in that bull market. I'm sure you remember well. And, volatility works both ways. I mean, it's very negative to the downside. It wrecks you, emotionally. But surprisingly enough, going to the upside is often it's also very stressful. I mean, I remember it was going up and I thought I couldn't understand why. And I sold it. I sold it all. And, 2 days later, I was staring at my screen, and I remember thinking to myself, why did I do that? I mean, what was the point of that? I could not answer that question. So, I have always been interested in MicroStrategy as an investment, but I didn't understand it. I couldn't understand where he was going with it. And about a year ago, I had a revelation, and basically it centered around the question of, what would Michael Saylor do with this Bitcoin? What's the point of it? I can't imagine him just gathering all this Bitcoin so he could sit on it like an egg. And we'll talk about that going forward here to try and understand what I think is going to happen in the future. And it includes a lot of wild scenarios. I mean, even the idea that MicroStrategy could probably end up mining Bitcoin someday. And we'll cover that here a little bit. So let's talk about the MNAV. This seems to be the thing that people just keep tripping all over themselves. They're falling on their swords and they just can't get it. I'm going to make a statement right now. If you can understand what I'm about to say, this one statement, then everything we talk about, you can relate it back to this statement. And you can try, if you start thinking about it, you'll be able to explain some of this to yourself. So, what is MicroStrategy? MicroStrategy is a growth company that is using its treasury operations through intelligent leverage to securitize Bitcoin. So if you can get that, and just keep it in mind, and remember the other thing that we said, that basically this is a one-way trip. I mean, this is his asset. It's what's on the balance sheet. There's nothing else. And the goal going forward is to always have more Bitcoin per share for every one of these purchases going forward. So, the MNAV, this idea of the multiple, say how much Bitcoin MicroStrategy holds compared to its market cap, usually falls somewhere between 2 and 3 as a multiple. And some people would say, well, traditional Wall Street, they're CNBC, they're really having a lot of trouble understanding this, because they look at it and they see MicroStrategy in the wrong way. They see it as, first off, most of them see it as a holding company. And remember what we just said it really was. It's not. It's a growth company. So people get right off the bat, they get going down the wrong road. It's not a holding company. This is not an ETF. This isn't a closed-end fund. You remember GPTC, and you remember all the nightmare that was associated with that. The Wall Street Journal interviewed me several years ago about that particular trade that I was involved in. And at the time I gave a quote to them. It was, GPTC is like the Hotel California. You can check in, but you can never check out. You could not exit that thing as it went into a discount. So it's not a closed-end fund. It's not a holding company like an ETF. An ETF is a wrapped Bitcoin. It's like 1-to-1. And full disclosure, I even have ETFs. I have just about every kind of exposure you can imagine to Bitcoin, and I don't care. I've got a lot of different buckets of Bitcoin, and I do that on purpose. And getting back to MicroStrategy in this MNAV. So if you're saying to yourself, well, why would it trade at this premium? And part of it is what you already brought up. I mean, you said it, Sean. He has somehow gotten his finance team, which they're very small, by the way. That there are only like 2,500 employees, I think, at MicroStrategy. The actual team that does this financial innovation is less than probably a dozen people, I've been told. But they have really found a way to tap into markets that we have never seen before. Just remember that when we discuss it, it is because, just like that first statement I made, they are a Bitcoin company. It's Bitcoin that is driving this strategy. Bitcoin is what's making this happen. And why another reason Wall Street doesn't understand this is because they don't get Bitcoin, and they can't understand that this asset, this fixed asset, finite supply, is going to continue going up. The average CAGR over the last 4-5 years has been 55%. Some people think it's going to go down over the next 4 years. I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, let's I'll take a break for a minute, and then if you want, we can get into the convertible bonds, because that's a pretty good way to kind of look at this, how that works.
Yep. Before we do, you said there like securitizing Bitcoin. What do you mean by that?
Well, they're basically making their shares a proxy for Bitcoin. They are giving people in the market, including these convertible bond buyers, they are giving them options that they wouldn't normally have or could not even touch if it were just Bitcoin. These bond buyers, they can't buy Bitcoin. Many asset allocators, they can't buy Bitcoin. Many of them can't, even the bond traders can't buy into some securities. And just so if you think of capital allocators across the market, you can think of them as like in silos. They're in buckets, and sometimes those buckets, they're unique. They can't move in between. So by securitizing Bitcoin, by putting their stock on it, they are able to capitalize on these markets. When they look at the convertible bond market, this is a segment of the market that's very small. Putnam put out things in 2022. It was like $276 billion in their total asset class. I think that Saylor himself just said his finance team must have updated their numbers. They say it's like 340 billion right now. And when you think of how much Saylor and MicroStrategy have used of that, it's just a small percentage. And so there's a lot of runway in front of them to do this. So, and when I say securitizing, it's because they're also offering all kinds of different products to these different buckets based on volatility, based on returns, on risk. Again, some of these markets are very small. They wouldn't even have access to Bitcoin without that trade.
Yeah, interesting. One thing you said is you're talking about leverage. It works both ways, to the upside and to the downside. I guess that's something to be pretty mindful of, and I'd like to hear what you think in regards to that. Say Bitcoin, we're roughly at about 100,000 thereabouts today, time of recording. Say we go to $2, $3, $4, $500,000 this cycle. It just really pumps. At some stage, I truly believe that we will have pullbacks. Maybe they're going to be a little bit smaller. I don't think that super cycle where we go up and to the right forever is playing out this cycle. However, Bitcoin's been in a super cycle since its inception. If you bought it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, and just walked away and came back, you wouldn't have noticed any of the dump. So like Bitcoin, truly, it's going up and to the right for the rest of our lives. There are going to be periods where it comes back down though, and especially if we like rally hard. Say Bitcoin drops and we get a 30 or 50% drawdown in Bitcoin. What happens to the leverage play of MicroStrategy?
Well, right now today, let's just take today. He's been smash buying these ATMs at the market, which is a very unique tool, if you will. It's only done in the U.S. Basically, what you're doing is you are issuing shares that are immediately tradable on the market, and so that's what it is. Which normally a dilutive technique. And this convertible bond offerings that he's also been laddering out along the years. Right now, he's out to 2032, I think is the last one. So let's look at all of those. There's like 6 of them now. Let's look at all the ATMs and let's look at where he sits right now. For MicroStrategy to be in any kind of significant, I will say it's not even an issue, but where you could think of them as having to take action to service debt, Bitcoin would have to go down to somewhere between $15,000 to $18,000 and stay there for like 5 or 6 years. So let's talk about the convertible bonds for a minute. As I said, this is a small market, and convertible bonds they're new. They've only been around since like the early 90s. So they're not very old. And when they first came out, I'm not even sure they had much of a market because I don't think people really, I'm not an expert in convertible bonds, but I do know that they didn't know how to use them. They were probably not even priced correctly at first. And they're a very unique instrument in the sense that they start out as a bond. And so there is a floor to that bond, which some investors are going to want. And then as they progress in their maturity, they move up and they turn more into equity as they mature or age. Not always, but in MicroStrategy's case, they are definitely turning into shares. For instance, he just mentioned in that clip that you had the $3 billion purchase. So that was a senior convertible note, convertible bond out to the market. 25% of that was taken up by one company, Allianz, the largest insurance company in the world, German-based. They must have said, we want all we can have of it. So they took 25% of it. And then thinking about these bonds, so as they, go up the ladder, and that's another thing. These are perfect made for MicroStrategy. I don't know how Michael Saylor says they stumbled into this, and I don't know how accurate that is, but these notes, these bonds are perfect because the average maturity is 5 to 7 years. So you and I know from being veteran Bitcoiners through years of this that there are cycles to Bitcoin. Usually we think of them as a 4-year cycle. And we also know that if you look at any 4-year period, you can't find a time other than there was a little wick one time that dipped into it. But there's not a 4-year period where you're not going to be able to have a positive return on Bitcoin. So that note was $3 billion. You know what the interest rate was on that, the coupon?
0%.
Was zero. So I just gave you $3 billion. There's no interest on it. It's going to come due in 6 years. And there is a premium on it, which means that it has a strike price. So those stocks going up to the future like this, at the time when they floated that, it was $430 was the price of MicroStrategy. So they added the 55% premium of that $430 and put it on top of it. The strike price comes out to $672. I will tell you as an aside right now that all these bonds are converting, and that's unheard of. They're actually making their strike price as they go forward. Convertible bonds don't do that. So I've given you $3 billion and it's got zero interest on it and it's good for 6 years. And, I don't know what you're going to do, but for me, I'm going to save like $25 to go out to Subway or something. And the rest of it, I'm going to buy Bitcoin. And that's what Michael Saylor's doing. He's buying Bitcoin with it. The hardest asset, the greatest monetary invention in the history of mankind, something that's CAGR over the last 5 years has been 55%. So, and you're probably thinking, well, why would they do that? And the reason is Allianz, okay, they have this huge company. They have a small segment that is convertible bond only. So they're looking for these convertible bonds. Michael Saylor, the only reason this works is because of Bitcoin. You remember our first statement? He's securitizing Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin that's doing this. Bitcoin's volatile. You and I know that. We've laid in bed some nights staring up at the ceiling as it drops down 40%, sometimes 75%. We've gone through these times. And, we're hard as nails right now. You and I, we're a couple of badasses who really, we're not too worried about volatility. But a lot of people are. And these convertible bond buyers, they're QIBs, by the way. They're qualified institutional buyers. And we'll just call them QIBs. So they're looking at this and they've got a floor in the bond. They're safe. And you're thinking, well, they're giving up, 50 some percent because of the premium and stuff, but they're really not. What they're doing is, first off, a convertible bond that offered up 7 to 15% it's not very volatile. Bitcoin's volatile, and MicroStrategy on top of that is more volatile. So he's got all this volatility in front of this bond here. And these buyers are looking at that and they're saying, and here's another thing. They don't even really care about that strike price. They don't give a shit about that $672. What they want is that volatility. And they're going to take that volatility and it's called arbitrage. They're going to arbitrage, but they're going to remain market neutral. They're just going to arbitrage on either side of that volatility, and they're going to be making money, a lot of money. Those bonds, here's another thing. Those bonds the blended return for all those bonds out there has been 100%. They've doubled. I've never heard of anything like that in a bond market. So the only thing that you have to think about as far as downturns is that MicroStrategy is doing something really smart. If you go into their balance sheet, and I've lost track, by the way, they just smashed bought again. And I don't know when we're recording this, what day it is, but the bottom line is, if you look at their debt, their Bitcoin to market cap, they usually keep that at about 25% or less. And that's really smart, because think about it. What if there was a drop of 75% in Bitcoin overnight? It doesn't really matter. What if there was a drop to 18,000? These bonds, here's another thing. See, Wall Street and TradFi, they just don't understand that there's no risk to these. That MicroStrategy is unencumbered. These aren't on their balance sheet. So if a bond ever came up for due in 5 or 6 years, and Bitcoin was $18,000 and had stayed there all this time, yeah, MicroStrategy might have to actually sell some Bitcoin, I guess, or they'd probably just go in the debt market and raise some money to pay off the bond. And they're retiring these bonds as they go along. So getting back to what I was saying, they're laddering them out. They ladder them out, usually one a year, and they're putting them out to like 32. So they're doing like on an average, maybe 6 of these. And that's why he's doing the ATM smash buying right now. I'll take a break. That's a lot.
Yeah. And I just want to zero in a little bit more on the volatility. Like put the bondholders and the people that are financially engineering and playing that fiat game, traditional finance game. But just for like the everyday person, I'm the biggest advocate of get as much Bitcoin and self-custody as you possibly can. We're going through a transition of the separation of money from state. Like the US dollar, world currency, fiat in general, is in a dollar debt spiral. It's game over, really, for anyone saving in cash. So, I have the strongest belief: get as much Bitcoin as possible. If you want to go out on the risk curve after a certain amount of time, do it, whatever. But I guess what I want to drill down and what I don't know is, okay, someone's accumulated Bitcoin, they got it in self-storage, cold storage, they're doing whatever they can. They want to go out onto the risk curve. It's their money, it's their choice. They go into MicroStrategy. Bitcoin comes down. What volatility do you see, not for the bondholders, but for the stockholders of MicroStrategy when Bitcoin does have that dip? Say Bitcoin has a 30% dip or a 50% dip. What are people going to see? 75% draw down the MicroStrategy stock, or what happens there?
Well, it's a good point. I mean, as we said, Bitcoin's volatility is high. If you think of it from year to year and think of it as the rate of return, yeah, it's probably, like I said, around 55 this year. And if you do the same analysis to MicroStrategy, they're up around 80 to 90, I think, vol. And so, yeah, it is reflexive on the way up, and it could be reflexive on the way down. And I'll tell you another reason why that could be the case. If I had two choices between my Bitcoin on a hardware wallet and MicroStrategy, and I had to sell some or wanted to sell some, what would I sell? It's going to be MicroStrategy. What would I do if I had a choice between MicroStrategy and ETFs? That'd be a tough call, because you see, if you look out, if you think about what you're really asking, you're kind of discussing about where you think where Bitcoin is going to go over the next, for me, it's next 12 to 18 months, but I'm even looking at the 4-year cycle now, and I'm trying to understand that and where this is going. And then the other thing is, if you go back to that original question I had about a year ago, where I said to myself, what's the point of this? What is he doing? I actually think MicroStrategy is going to end up being something that is not right now. That that Bitcoin that he's accumulating, Bernstein, the private wealth fund that just a firm that just came out with a new price target for MicroStrategy, $600 a share. But they also said that they think by 2035 he's going to have 4% of the world's Bitcoin. And I hate to move away from this convertible debt discussion or volatility, but for me, I probably would be hard pressed to sell my MicroStrategy stock, because I think in 5 to 10 years down the road, MicroStrategy is going to be the world's largest Bitcoin, and I'll say bank, but that won't cover enough of what I think they're going to be. That conversation, did you ever listen to that conversation that he had about 2.5 months ago with Saifedean Ammous? It was where he was discussing, yeah, do you remember? It was where they were discussing banks. They kind of got into a butted heads a little bit.
Yes. I didn't see all of it, but yes, I do remember very clearly that video.
Yeah, it was kind of a different video. In fact, at the time, it was so unique that I played it back 2 or 3 times, that section in there, so I could look at it. Michael Saylor brought that conversation up on purpose. And if you remember what he said in that, he brought the conversation around to the idea of a bank within a sovereign nation with its own currency that was printing its currency, that was too big to fail, and that he called it, if you remember, risk-free. And I think at some point going forward, it's not just MicroStrategy. If you look at what's going to happen in this country as soon as this new administration is seated, one of the biggest changes we're going to see is the repeal of Psalm 121. And when that happens, you better stand the fuck by, because there are going to be some changes that are going to be eye-watering. I've mentioned this, maybe if not with you, on somewhere else, that BlackRock, they wanted their own bank. Banks right now are pretty much, it's toxic. They can't touch Bitcoin. Larry Finks, he wants his own bank to handle some of their transactions. He needs a banker. He makes a call, and I don't know who the hell he called, but over a weekend, next thing you know, Bank of America is given an exemption. All these banks are going to want that. You know what they're going to want? They're going to want to trade, they're going to sell, and they're especially going to want to custody Bitcoin. And I think that MicroStrategy is probably going to be the largest financial institution on the planet holding Bitcoin, and will become probably the world's greatest bank. And so I'd like to see that, how it transpires. Now, there are going to be a lot of people that, just push back against this whole narrative, because, they think they're considering cold custody in a hardware wallet as the only financial way, or the only way to hold Bitcoin. And I have a hardware wallet, and it's, I used air gap and every other damn thing. But I also think that going forward, some of these ideas that we've had are probably going to be very difficult to play out. I don't know if we haven't even touched about some of the problems with the base layer and where this is going.
Yep, we can dive into layer one in the next podcast that will be dropping shortly for everyone. With Michael Saylor and doing all this, yes, there are many ways to be able to hold Bitcoin. It's not just in self-custody in a hardware wallet, but Bitcoin and self-custody in a hardware wallet is the only way that it allows you to gain all the benefits of what Bitcoin is, as censorship, unconfiscatable, sovereign money. So there's other games to play, but that's the most important aspect of Bitcoin. If you get to a certain stack or whatever and then go out on the risk curve, you can play, or if you have no access, then you can get exposed to number go up. But I just want to be very clear that the revolution of Bitcoin is being able to self-custody and hold it as a bearer asset. We've got about 15 minutes left to dive into MicroStrategy. Like, what are the main things? I don't know enough to be able to ask an intelligent question of, like, what should we know? Where should we really be focusing? Like, what else do people need to understand about this play, or what's interesting? Like, I also agree that he's going for about 4%. I reckon he wants 1 million Bitcoin under control, and then whatever he does with that. But sort of, like, what else do we need to know? What questions am I not asking?
Well, I want to second what you're saying. You know, the beauty, the miracle of Bitcoin is that you can take it on that wallet, you know, and when the shit hits the fan, you can basically memorize those 12 seed words if you want to, cross the border, have them strip search you, do anal probes and any other damn thing they want. And when you're done, you walk across that border and they can strip you naked, and you can turn around and just flip them off because you've got all your money. Your wealth is with you. And we see nation states collapsing all over the planet right now. We see tremendous turmoil, endless conflict. We see governments that are debasing their currencies left and right. And Bitcoin is that ultimate hope. And you're only going to achieve that in a hardware wallet, self-custody, and knowing your seed words and protecting them. That's the only way. And when I talk about MicroStrategy, I guess you can see, for me, it's almost like a game, in the sense that I'm really interested in this. I find it fascinating. I just think that it's wonderful the way MicroStrategy is basically kind of sticking at traditional finance. And that's the other thing, you know, on a positive note, you may not realize this, but he is just drawing in massive amounts of money, massive, that would never touch Bitcoin, never have any exposure to Bitcoin. Now you've got all these QIBs, you've got all these institutional investors, family offices. They're all daily now looking at Bitcoin's price. They're following it in the news. They have an actual interest in it. And you haven't seen anything yet. You know, the ranking for the NASDAQ 100 was on the 13th. And I am projecting that it was earlier on maybe the 9th. So I'm projecting they're going to be probably like number 40 or 41. And that's going to be released. It's coming up. I think it's this Friday. Well, when they release that number, I've already looked at the math. They're going to get about $2 billion of passive income just flowing into them. And it could be a lot more. They're going to be next year, probably in the summer, they're going to be included in the S&P 500. That's just huge. And here's another thing. Every time they're doing this, as they're increasing their market cap, I haven't even talked about how they manipulate that MNAV. As they manipulate that, as they increase that market cap, their credit risk goes down. They're getting a better credit risk. When they get on Friday, they're going to have a better credit risk. In June, with the S&P 500, they're going to have a better credit risk. They're going to be able, and you know, when they got that 0%, and they shopped those out, you know, they shopped those offerings out, and they floated out there, and they wanted 0%. So they may have had to give up some of the premium one way or the other, but there's no limit to how they can continue to do this, other than, like I said, they don't want to go, it seems like they don't want to go past that 25%, that ballpark. Yeah. So, you know, just looking forward, I think people are going to get their eyes watered. And then one other thing I want to say is that, you know, I have all the Bitcoin that I need right now, in the sense that I'm not out buying any more Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the royal flush. Okay, so once you understand that, you just take your chips, you just come up to the table and you push them into the table. You're all in, and I am. I mean, there's nothing else that I hold or proxy, whatever. It's just Bitcoin. And if I had given you that $3 billion and you had been thinking to yourself, when am I going to invest in that? You first thing you should have said is, what is the opportunity cost? What is it going to be? What is the next best alternative asset that I'm going to pass up if I put that $3 billion in NVIDIA, real estate, I don't know, whatever crap you want to put it into? Every answer is going to be Bitcoin. But having said that, I've got all the Bitcoin I want. It has been a lot of fun for me to see that for every Bitcoin, and I've tracked this, for every Bitcoin that I could have bought on January 1st last year, I now have 1.67 Bitcoin. So if I'd have bought spot, I'd have those Bitcoin. But right now, if I turn those shares and I can sell those shares, one of the great things about the US stock market is it's liquid. And I haven't even talked about that. MicroStrategy has got liquidity all over it. It's like they're swimming in it. You can't even do the things that I'm talking about if you don't have liquidity around your company, and they've got it now. They've got options volatility. They've got liquidity. They're just attracting it like a black hole. The event horizon on a black hole is when you get to that part of the black hole, nothing can ever be observed outside of it again, that event horizon. And it's all moving to what's called the singularity in the middle. I don't want to wax too philosophical about this, but I can convert those shares and buy Bitcoin this evening, and I can have those shares. I did this not recently. I can have those shares into an account, converted over to a cash account balance in less than 5 business days, and then just go out and buy some Bitcoin. If things like, let's say the shit starts hitting the fan and things look really iffy, I'll liquidate some of these things. I'll just put it into my hardware wallet and move on. But I have a lot more Bitcoin right now.
Yep. One thing I think that may help people, because as Bitcoin's hit $100,000, there's so many new people coming to the space, which is great. Like, if you're new, hit subscribe. Some really incredible podcasts with the best and brightest minds. But both George and myself have been here for at least a full cycle. There's so many people that have been here for a very long time and went very hard accumulating Bitcoin. If you're new to the space, hit your goal with Bitcoin and self-custody. If you need help, reach out to the sponsors, the Bitcoin Way. They can help you get into self-custody and really protect it. Then, George, I love the way that you approach it. You're like, it's a game. It's very grounded, and you've already set yourself up. You've done all this. So for people that are new to the space, what kind of threats are there, or risks to themselves, long-term generational wealth? Because if they can get to 1 Bitcoin, that's generational wealth for the future. What's the risk or the threat of people coming in here and hearing everyone get so excited about MicroStrategy, and then maybe trying to think that they can get more Bitcoin through MicroStrategy and not actually accumulating Bitcoin in self-custody first? How do you see it? And I guess we do need to remember that we've been here for a little bit longer than someone that's maybe day one.
That's a great question. First off, they should realize that just listening to me is a risk, because one, I'm obviously very pumped and excited about Bitcoin, and I'm enjoying this journey down the rabbit hole with MicroStrategy. But my background, and I've mentioned this before, I'm an ex oil field worker, ex cop, ex miner, not Bitcoin. I mean a real miner. Ex fighter pilot. I don't have any background in finance. I just study constantly. So, don't listen to me. I'm sometimes the village idiot, and I've gotten a lot of things wrong too, including my original purchase of MicroStrategy, which if I'd have kept it, would have been worth a lot more than it is even today. But the thing is that you're right. What I saw last time in the last cycle was that people were trying to do everything they could to catch up. That's what it was. It was that catch-up fever. And so when you look at Bitcoin and you go, it's going up 55%, that's not enough for me. It's like, pull your head out of your ass. 55% is huge. If you could really get to 1 Bitcoin, you made it. All you got to do now, and if you had 1 Bitcoin, I would not do anything with any MicroStrategy or any of the leverage plays on top of it, or the ETFs. I would put that thing in cold storage. I'd use a multi-sig approach at some point as it goes up. And as you mentioned, the Bitcoin Way, and there's some other good ones out there too. You can't do multi-sig on your own. Just don't do it, folks.
No,
unless you
100%. For everyone listening, do not attempt multi-sig on your own. there will be like maybe 1% of people watching this that are competent enough and they know who they are. But if you don't know 100,000% that you can do a multi-sig, reach out to someone like the Bitcoin Way. The first 30 minutes is free, but just don't do it, because if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. And no more Bitcoin, no helpline, no CEO, no Satoshi on the phone. Hey, give me back my Bitcoin. It's gone.
That's exactly right. I always think of us in our Bitcoin world that we're sitting on a three-legged stool. And that's a really powerful. A three-legged stool is a powerful piece of furniture, and it's ancient. It's the you can see pictures of it inside the pyramids. Used in their rooms. So what I was going to say is you need to, get as much Bitcoin as you can, stack like a psychopath, even at these price points, which seem probably very high to people. You need to make sure that you understand how to hold on to Bitcoin. Study Bitcoin so that you can get through this volatility. Don't do like George here. And as it starts rising really fast, do something stupid like selling it. Myself, I've always thought of long-term holders as kind of smart money. If you look at them in all these other cycles, long-term holders are usually the people that sell into these peaks. And we call them smart money. People that don't think long-term holders sell their Bitcoin, they're mistaken. They absolutely do. But these long-term holders that sold into this rise to 73K, and then a bunch more sold into 100K, I think they're dumb money now, because I see the writing on the wall, and this is not the time to sell Bitcoin. You are dumb money. So if you can get one Bitcoin, like we said, avoid those things that caused people to lose the Bitcoin. That's the third leg of the seat. You can't lose the Bitcoin. You cannot lose it. And how people did that last time was mainly by leverage. They either went in over leverage, they ended up with a mark-to-market call, margin call, and ended up with less Bitcoin or maybe no Bitcoin. There's so many horror stories from this last cycle where there was this deleveraging that occurred. I really think that the last cycle was brought up short. I really think that we were headed to 100K at the time, but I think the GBTC premium unwinding to a discount started it. I think that I just did not understand the level of animosity from the current administration towards crypto and Bitcoin. And I did not understand how pervasive Choke Point 2.0 was. And then I also think that I misunderstood the barriers to institutional arrival. Remember, last time I think a lot of us thought institutions were coming here in 21. I was completely wrong. They did not arrive. They are here now. I'll tell you right now, the perimeter has been breached. The trip wires are tripped. Flares are in the air, and they're inside the perimeter with us now. They're here. So you cannot lose that Bitcoin. Avoid those margins. Don't trade MSTX or MSTU. I don't know if you know what those are, but they're if MSTR is like double volatility, they're double again. And the thing is that many people, again, they're trying to catch up, and they just don't understand. I'm going to tell you something. 55% CAGR, meaning you reinvest your dividends. Now, listen to me. If you have $1 million, it can be $1 million, it can be whatever. You're going to have, at the end of 5 years, you're going to have $9 million. That's unheard of. If you have a tenth of a Bitcoin, you're going to have a Bitcoin in whatever, fiat dollars. So 55% should be good enough for anybody. And these 2 times, the thing is that they have something called tracking error, and it's in their prospectus. And if you read about it, you go, boy, this doesn't sound good. If you read MSTX's past history on volatility decay, you look at it and you go, that doesn't sound good. Those are instruments for people that know which way the momentum's going, and you trade it for 1 day, 2 days, and you get out. And how many times you've been here for a while. Can you tell me tomorrow which way Bitcoin's going to go on the open? I don't know it either.
Yeah, I think what we should do is Everyone, I will link the Bitcoin video that we're going to go into and record right now and dive into it. But let's just wrap up the MicroStrategy. It's a leverage play. You need to get Bitcoin in self-custody first. Protect yourself. Do that. It's a leverage play to be able to go out. There is risk attached. It takes quite a while to be able to understand, but it's something, my biggest takeaway, George, from this is if people do buy MicroStrategy, it's something probably to hold for quite a long time. Maybe it's like the new Amazon or something. And Amazon had many 90% drawdowns, but look where it is now. Is that sort of what you'd say for the takeaway, or how would you wrap it up?
Well, it's funny because Amazon has kind of the same. There are similarities between Amazon and MicroStrategy in the sense that a founder with a vision, who understood that he had to create a moat around his product. One of the reasons that MicroStrategy right now is pushing the buy button so hard on these ATMs is I believe that Michael Saylor probably sees the handwriting on the wall for the next 12 months. I mean, we haven't seen anything yet. I'm just telling you right now, you stand the F by. We are going to see incredible things happen over the next 12 months. And I think they're going to involve almost like crossing a chasm in an S curve. I'm not sure where we're going to go in the next 4-year cycle, but I would not take a chance on missing that. So you need to be in the market, meaning not timing the market. You just need to be in Bitcoin, getting as much as you can. If you're DCAing, and we're talking one Bitcoin, we said earlier, make sure that you're consolidating those UTXOs. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to find out. You need to learn how to do that. I think for everybody out there, if you don't want to lose that Bitcoin, you've got to consolidate UTXOs now before things do take off next year and fees start to increase on the base layer. Right now, I say if you can get 0.1 Bitcoin in a consolidated UTXO, that's probably good for right now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. George, thank you so much. Everyone, check out the video that we dive right into Bitcoin. We're going to dive really deep down the rabbit hole with nation states, what we expect to come, strategic Bitcoin reserve. It's going to be very bullish. So we'll see you over in that video. George, thanks very much for educating me in regards to MicroStrategy.
Oh, you're welcome, Sean. I always appreciate your content. I have a great time talking to you. Thanks.
Cheers, mate. Bye.